I know how the story I'm fighting a battle you've already won. No matter what comes my way, I will overcome. Don't know what you're doing, but I know what you've done. I'm fighting a battle you've already won.
Today we kick off our new sermon series, a study of the book of Esther. We'll be looking at this for 2 months, and I'm really excited about being able to take this biblical narrative journey as we go through the book of Esther, studying it both as a church, but hopefully as individuals. And my prayer is that we go through this study, that it won't be just one of those things where, because probably for many of you in the room, you've studied Esther before. You know the story. You know how it turns out. But hopefully it'll be a whole lot more than just, I've heard that before, or maybe I'll pick up a little bit of new information. No, I pray that as we go through this study together as individuals and as a church, that we'll see the truths that we discover on the pages of the book of Esther and be able to relate those and apply those to our lives and what we're going through. And one of those big truths that just kind of is right out in front of you from the very beginning is this idea that God is in control. In fact, on the graphic, it says Esther, God's providence and protection. And I pray that we'll see the invisible hand of God throughout this study as we look at the pages of Esther. Now, I put on the outline kind of a summary statement for us. And that summary statement is this. And it's a summary statement not just for our passage today, but for really the entire book of Esther. It says, although God is not mentioned by name anywhere in the book of Esther, we see God at work invisibly and behind the scenes. There are neither dramatic miracles nor great heroes, just apparently ordinary providence moving flawed and otherwise unremarkable people into precisely the right place at precisely the right time to bring a vast empire into line and establish God's purposes for his people. Now, I left something off the outline, and so if you have the outline in front of you, I want you to write this down because we use the word providence a lot. And I want to give us a working definition for providence. And like I said, I forgot to put it on the outline, so we'll have it on the screens for a while to give you time to write it. I not only forgot it on the outline, I forgot to bring it up at the last service. So I'm not doing so good. So 2 out of 3, we're giving this definition, but here it is. God's ordering and working out every event in the universe at every moment. God's ordering and working out every event in the universe at every moment. Now, that's a fairly simple definition of providence. There's a lot more technical ones if you want to look it up and try to get one that has a little bit more information about that. But I thought we'd start with something pretty easy for us all to grab a hold of, that God is ordering and working in every event at all times in the universe. And we'll see God's providence throughout the pages of the book of Esther. God's always at work. Even when we don't see him, even when we don't hear him, even when we don't feel him, we can know and trust that God is at work. That's the big idea for our study this morning and for the entire book of Esther, is that God is always at work. God is always at work. Now, we have a lot to cover this morning, so we're going to dive right in and just kind of work our way through this introductory section. It almost doesn't feel like an introduction because it's got so many verses we're going to look at today, but we're going to get Esther all the way to the position of queen. Beginning in chapter 1, verse 1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd reign of his year. And I want to pause right here and just give us a little contextual background of what's going on. King Ahasuerus reigned from 486 to 465 BC. He's also known in history as King Xerxes. King Xerxes is his Greek name. Ahasuerus is his Persian name. So if you're studying history, it'll probably show up a whole lot more with Xerxes. But they're one and the same. They're the same person. And so if we're wondering when was the time frame for what we're getting ready to look at, it says it was in his third year of his reign. Well, if he reigned from 486 BC till 465, we know that this would have been 483 BC, for those of you that like to track things on a timeline. Now, the Persian Empire at this time would have been massive. It would have been larger than any empire known to man at this time. It reigned all the way from some of the countries of North Africa, all the way up through the Middle East, where Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all the way up to Turkey, and then heading east to Iraq, Iran, and all the way to Pakistan. I mean, it was a massive empire that King Ahasuerus had control over as king. He had inherited this from his father in this. That it wasn't something that he did. He was able to take it from his father. Now, where does this fit with all the information happening with the other exiles? Because we're in a period of Jewish exile here. Those Jews that were taken into Babylon, it was about 100 years earlier. So we're looking here when we talk about Esther and Mordecai, they and their families, their parents, their grandparents, they have been exiles in Babylon. They ultimately ended up being taken over by the Persian Empire. And so they have been in exile now for about 100 plus years. And we know about 50 years before Esther, there was a group led by Zerubbabel that went back to Jerusalem. And their goal was to rebuild the temple, and they succeeded in that. And then about 40 years after Esther, we have another wave of exiles that returned, and that was led by Nehemiah. Their purpose was to rebuild the what? The wall around Jerusalem. And so we have these different waves. There's another one with Ezra, and I'll talk more about that on Beyond the Notes this week, because we really don't have a whole lot of time to do a lot of contextual background study, but on Beyond the Notes, we'll do a little bit deeper dive into understanding what's the culture, what's the context, what's the background for all that's going on here in the book of Esther. But we do get some information right off the bat. Let's continue on in verse 3. In the third year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him. And while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So here's feast number one. There's going to be 3 feasts mentioned here in these first 9 verses. In this first one, he is inviting his military leaders, his governors of the empire, all to come back and be a part of this large feast. There was more than just feasting and celebrating. There was a strategic point in this. We'll get to that in just a minute. But it lasted for 6 months, probably some rotating in and out during that period. But that's the first feast that we hear about. We continue on in verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, Susa being the capital city there in Persia, Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So he has the 6-month-long feast with all these different officials and servants and army leaders all coming in and out. And now at the end of that time, he has a week-long feast for all the citizens, great or small, there that live in Susa. And why does a king do something like this? Well, a big reason is the king just kind of wants to show off. That's what kings do, right? They want to show all that they have. They want you to see all the power. That's why I've entitled this first section, The Power, because we're going to see the power of the empire. We're going to see the power of King Ahasuerus. We're going to see all of that on display. And so and by the way, we don't know who wrote Esther. Some say that Mordecai wrote Esther. Others say that Ezra or Nehemiah, but we don't know who the human author is of the book of Esther. But we do know that they had a great understanding of both Persian culture and Persian regulation and how the court functioned, how the government functioned, as well as a Jewish background as well. And so here in this first part, they're going to make a big point to point out the grandeur, the opulence, the extravagance of what's going on there in the king's palace. Look at verse 6. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Quite an impressive look there in the palace for this open house that we were allowing all of these citizens to come into. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. And now we get to this third feast. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. Here's a little just practical application. We're going to move quickly on from this first point of power, is that we need to resist the temptation to trust in worldly and powerful things. We have the same temptation that those citizens there in Susa, those people that served in the military there for the Persian Empire, anybody had the temptation to want to put their trust in a powerful king and a powerful empire and a powerful military. And we have that same temptation to put our trust in things outside of the one that we truly can trust, and that's a holy sovereign God. We have the temptation to put our trust in things. We have the temptation to put our trust in material wealth, into our bank account, into our homes, into our cars. We'll find ourselves putting our trust and our security in things that really aren't going to last that long, and they really can't provide any true hope. We need to resist that temptation and be reminded that God is always at work, active in every situation, even in these first 9 verses, because we're going to see his hand moving and shaping things as we move forward. Number 2, the problem. The problem. Things are about to get real interesting here in our narrative. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded, and now we get this list of 7 eunuchs that served King Ahasuerus. And again, it gives us that feeling that whoever wrote this understood the Persian government and wanted to make sure they were putting together a very historical narrative for us. So he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. So what did he command them to do? Verse 11, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. And so here we get the king and picture the scene. 7 days of just a big party there in the city of Susa, a huge party. The king is lavishing his food and his drink. He's inviting everybody in. It's open palace. Apparently it's open bar. I mean, it's just one big party. And he thinks, all right, the climax of this entire feast will be, we'll bring the most beautiful woman in the nation, my queen, Queen Vashti, in and let everybody see her amazing beauty. Well, that didn't go so well. As we continue to read, verse 13, it says, verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuch. And how does he respond? At this, the king became enraged and his anger burned within him. Now, I don't know about you, but I have questions about this narrative, this part of the narrative. I wish there was more here. I mean, what exactly did he ask her to do? I mean, a lot of commentators have said that he was asking her to do something very immodest in coming. Others are silent on that issue, but others kind of say, well, why she didn't come, and maybe something had happened in the past when she had shown up, or maybe she just was using common sense. It won't go well for me to show up in this room with a bunch of drunk men wanting just to look at me. And so she said no in that moment. We don't know any of that. And here's a great Bible study principle for us, especially as we go through Esther. Unknowns are okay. Unknowns are okay. Yes, we want more information in this. We want more. So oftentimes we want more information in the Bible, but God's given us what we need in the Word of God, right? We have everything he wants us to have in the Word of God. And so we have to just say, okay, I'm going to take the text for what it says. Now, And we'll have a couple of takeaways here from this. Let me finish this section, verse 13 through 15. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times. We're going to be introduced to another group of men. There are going to be 7 more names. And again, we're being introduced now to what I will call the king's advisory council. These men were very, very close to King Ahasuerus. Verse 13 says, Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshenan, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. These were the people that he trusted the most. These were the people that anytime the king had a question, had a decision to make, in this case, when he's mad and has to figure out what he needs to do, he could go to this group of men. He could trust them. They had earned his trust over time. And so he would go and ask, hey, what should I do? And look, this is what we see in verse 15. Look at the question. According to the law, this is his question to these guys, what is to be done to Queen Vashti? Because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs. So what am I supposed to do? What do I do? He poses the question to them. Let me give you a couple of takeaways here. First of all, this is just real practical. Be careful who you go to for advice. Be very careful who you go to for advice. King Ahasuerus, he had this group of trusted advisors, but they were trusted advisors probably because they were yes men. They knew how to say the right thing so they could stay in that position. They didn't want to lose their prestige. They didn't want to lose their power, so they would quickly come along with whatever the king was thinking or try to help him in the area of what he was thinking. Listen, you need at least one person, a godly man or a godly woman that you can go to that will speak the truth in love to you. You need at least one, if not more. You need those people in your life that you know will give you the right answer even when you don't want to hear the right answer. Because we all have blind spots and we need people that will speak the truth in love to us. And I hope and pray you have at least, if you are a male, that you have at least one godly man that you can go to for wisdom and for advice. And if you're a female, you have a godly woman that you can go to for advice and for wisdom. We all need those people in our lives. I also want to just remind us that God is always at work and that his purposes are not frustrated by moral failures. And isn't that encouraging? Because we all have failed morally. And when we think about what's happening here in these last few verses we looked at, when we think about the debauchery, when we think about the vulgarity, when we think about the lust, when we think about all that was happening at this feast in this moment, that even in the midst of all of that, God was working through that to bring about his purposes. Why? Because God is a God of grace that sees the big picture. And he works even through our moral failures and the moral failures of others. Yes, sin does in fact grieve God greatly. And yes, there are in fact consequences to your sin and to my sin. But no amount of wrong frustrates God's sovereign purposes. He is a God of great grace. Number 3, the proposal. The proposal. This part is interesting as we get to this because we're going to hear the advisor's response. And I don't know if they had a little huddle and they all talked among themselves and Memucan was the one that came and gave the response, or Memucan just kind of goes off the cuff and immediately responds to the question. We don't know. Again, it's not there. But it's fascinating what he says because before he gives the answer to the question, he goes on a little rant. It sounds like he's having problems at home with his own wife. So look at verse 16. He says, Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, Not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. See what I mean? It sounds like he might be having some problems on the home front himself. Since they will say King Ahasuerus' commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. Now, not only was he probably having some problems at home with his own wife, but it's like, let's just blow this thing up bigger than it really is. Let's overreact. Let's exaggerate this problem. Let's turn this little dispute into an international event, right? Have you ever known people that like to do that, where they'll take a particular problem or particular issue and they can just blow it up and make it seem like it's the biggest thing in the world? You see, the king could have just handled this so much easier by saying, I've acted foolishly and I probably shouldn't have done what I did. But no, he gets his advisors involved and he goes off on this rant. And then we get to the actual proposal down there in verse 19 when he says, and this is Memucan still talking, if it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. In other words, let's get rid of the queen. And then number 2, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she, meaning somebody that'll comply. Verse 20, so when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. And this advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. And they sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Now, little application. First of all, King Ahasuerus is just reacting and responding selfishly and pridefully in this moment, right? He's been told no by the queen, and so he's acting very irrationally and foolish, but he's acting selfishly and pridefully. And I started thinking, I never do that, do I? You never do that. You've never reacted selfishly, right? You've never reacted pridefully because things didn't go the way you wanted to. Somebody didn't respond exactly like you wanted to. We all have that temptation to respond selfishly and pridefully. And what a great little reminder for all of us as we walk by the Spirit, not by the flesh, that we'll be careful and on guard not to act, not to respond selfishly and pridefully when things don't go our way. But on a little bit deeper level, as we look at this section, again, God is always at work, and God's plans are not hindered when the events of this world are sinful. God's plans are not hindered when the events of this world are sinful. You see, we have this idea sometimes in our mind that God is only working through those people who claim to be Christians, who are believers, who are following Christ, and are committed to following Christ. That's where God is working. But I would submit to you that God is just as much at work in the office of your unbelieving boss as he is in the study of Pastor Russell. I would submit to you that God is just as much at work in the nation of China and Iran and Russia as he is in the nation of the United States. If we believe that God is at work all the time, everywhere, then we have to realize that God is at work everywhere all the time. And see, here's what happens. If we don't believe that, if we see someone in our neighborhood or someone we work with that we might say, they are so lost. They are just so far gone. Why would I even bother sharing the gospel with them? We'll start to lose our evangelistic zeal if we stop and forget that God is at work everywhere all the time. Does that make sense? That if we understand he's at work, then that person that seems to be the furthest from God, hey, I might be the one God wants to use to bring them to saving faith. He might want to use me because he's already working in their heart and their lives. But we kind of just say, well, no, it must not be the case. Got to understand that God is working all the time, and even the sinfulness of this world will not hinder God's plans. I love this quote from Charles Swindoll, and I recommend the book. It's on your outline there, his book on the book of Esther. It's a lot. It's not a commentary. It reads like a narrative, and it's a fun book with a lot of great application. But listen to what he says. Here's a quote from that book. God is at work. He's moving. He's touching lives. He's shaping kingdoms. He's never surprised by what humanity may do. Just because actions or motives happen to be set secular or carnal or unfair, it doesn't mean he's not present. Those involved may not be glorifying him, but never doubt it. He's present. He's at work. You see, God's going to use Ahasuerus' sinfulness and Vashti's rebellion to achieve Esther's reign as queen. In Roman number 4, the process. Chapter 2, verse 1. We get this little phrase at the very beginning in verse 1. It says, after these things. And so you might think, well, it's right after they've sent this edict out that Queen Vashti's gone and women, you need to submit to your husbands and follow them and all that. No, there's a greater time period that's passed. It's more like 4 years, at least 3, but more like 4 years when we see this. How do I know that? Well, we get a timestamp a little bit later in chapter 2. If you flip over to verse 16, and it says, into the royal palace in the 10th month, at the end of the verse 16, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now remember, we were told at the beginning, it's the 3rd year of his reign in the very beginning of chapter 1. Now it's the 7th year of his reign. So there is a 4-year difference there. And I can explain one of the years in just a minute, but what happened in those other 3 years? Well, this is fascinating because this is the historical part that we can read about in other sources, that King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, was attempting to take over the nation of Greece. And it would be a battle that would last for multiple years, a little over 2 years. And he would win a lot of victories in many of those smaller battles and some of the larger battles, but ultimately he would not be able to defeat Greece. And so after 2+ years, the king returns back to Susa. He's lost. And you see, going back to those earlier feasts, those were strategy meetings. Those were pre-celebration meetings because we're getting ready to go to war against Greece and we're gonna wipe them out because we have this great empire. Well, now he returns a defeated man, a humiliated man. Maybe he's a little more reflective. Maybe he's thinking more about his own life, and maybe he's thinking about things that matter a whole lot more than what he used to think about. Whatever reason, the people around him pick up on this and continue to read. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. And then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the woman. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. This is the second part of that proposal that Memucan had, that we get rid of Vashti, but then we find a new king and a queen. And so now, some 3 years later, after losing to a battle to Greece, now that's exactly what Ahasuerus is going to do. And he says, let it be. Let's start this process of discovering the next queen for me. Verse 5 and following, we're introduced to our 2 main characters, Mordecai and Esther. Let's read those. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So here we learn a little bit background information about Esther and Mordecai. Mordecai, being very Jewish, we read here, he was about his family lineage. He was a Benjamite, and that he would been in captivity now for his family for probably from the very beginning, that 100 years since they had originally been taken. And we also learned that Mordecai and Esther are cousins. I think at some point growing up, I had the impression that Mordecai was Uncle Mordecai to Esther, but that's not in the text at all. They're cousins. Obviously, Mordecai's older than Esther, probably about 15 years older. But Esther loses both her mom and her dad at a very young age, tragically loses both her parents. Mordecai, the cousin, says, I'll take care of her, I'll raise her, and becomes a father-like figure to Esther. We also learned that Esther, what her Hebrew name is, Hadassah, but she went by, or at least the author goes by Esther most of the time, her Persian name of Esther. We We also learned that she was beautiful and lovely to look at, which is what's going to have her taken in just a little bit. Now, verse 8, we see that king's order being put into place. It says, when the king's order and his edicts were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, and the custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. Let's stop right there, because we need to make sure that we're not seeing this as just Persia's beauty talent or beauty contest. It's not Persia's Got Talent competition. It's not something that these women would have signed up. Josephus, the historian, says that there were approximately 400 of these young virgins that were taken, collected, gathered up because of their beauty and because of their youth and brought to Susa. This is not something that probably any of them would have ever wanted, especially if you're a Jewish girl like Esther. This would not be something you would have said, hey, mom, can you sign me up for that? I want to be a part of that. No, they would be taken from their family. They would be isolated from their family. They would probably never see their family again. They would not be allowed to ever marry. There would be this sense of isolation. And perhaps for some, culturally, that would not have been the worst thing that they could have experienced. But especially for Esther, a Jewish woman, this would not have been something that would have been, yeah, I get to be a part of this. But this is where she finds herself in a circumstance that's far from ideal. Again, we see the hand of God putting her where he needs her. Verse 9, and the young woman, referring to Esther, pleased him, Hegai, the eunuch, and won his favor. Early on, we see Esther winning the favor. I'll continue to read. And he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So she's finding favor. Reminds me of Daniel. Daniel, remember, he found favor as well, but there's a big difference here because Daniel was very clear that he was a Jew, right? He was very clear that he was going to live differently. We do not see that here in this. We're not told whether that's good or bad. We just know that maybe after 100 years of exile, they have been more assimilated and lost a lot of their Jewish identity in that time period. But we do see in verse 10 that Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. Whether there was strong anti-Semitic feeling and issues going on at that time, we're not told that either. We know that'll happen later with Haman, but at this point we don't know. Perhaps that's why. But we do see Mordecai caring for Esther even while she has been taken into this harem. It says, and every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now we get some explanation of how this whole process is going to work. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women, a whole year was this process, this beautification process. Seems like a little overkill to me, but that's what they did. When the young women went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Again, that 1 year, by the way, I almost forgot. That's another of those 4 years. So 2+ years in battle, 1 year of this beautification process takes up most of over 3 years, getting close to the 4 years that we have here. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. So this is the process. 400, one right after the other. And then we get to verse 15, when the daughter came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now listen again, she continues to win favor. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast. We end with a feast here for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. I'll be honest. Reading that is not something that, and you understand what's going on. You see, God is at work in all of this? How? He is. And we're going to end with that in just a minute, because I really believe that God was in fact at work through this whole process to put Queen Esther, or put Esther into the position of queen, because we know that the whole story is that one woman by the name of Esther, under the providence of God, is the one that kept genocide from happening to the Jewish people. But I also have a hard time finding the gospel in these verses. I'll know that as we continue our study through Esther, we will see that more clearly as we go through. But in these verses here, where is the gospel? And I came to this conclusion that we see the gospel in the contrast of what's happening here. Because see, we have a story here where we have a powerful and sinful king who meets and falls in love with a beautiful and pure bride, which is in contrast to the gospel, where we have a radiant and pure groom, king, choosing to love and purify a wretched and sinful bride. That's us. We also, unlike Ahasuerus, who took what was beautiful from others, we see Christ, who took us who were spiritually ugly and gave us his beauty and his righteousness. And if you're here today outside of Jesus Christ, well, my challenge is to you is that you would take seriously the truth of the gospel, that Christ died for sinners, just like you. He died in our place. He took our punishment, our wrath, so that anyone that would in fact turn from their sin and repentance and put their faith and trust in Christ and him alone would receive him as their Lord and Savior, and would receive the righteousness and the beauty and the holiness of Jesus, that imputed righteousness that those of us in Christ have. If you're here outside of Christ, I would pray that after the service is over that you would want to talk with one of our Connect members. They'll be down here after the service during the last song, and they would love to talk with you. But for those of us in Christ, I want to just remind you of a couple things real quickly as we wrap up. First of all, God's providential placement in our life. You are where God wants you to be, amen? Even if it doesn't seem like it, we can trust God's providential placement. And I'll be honest, as we're here, and as this storm, this what will soon be a hurricane named Milton, it's named after my grandfather, Milton, is bearing down on us. It's hard to believe that God would have us here, right? I mean, it's hard to do that. But here's the deal. If I believe that God is always at work, then I must be learning day by day to trust him more and more, amen? I must learn to trust him, that even though there's a storm coming, a physical storm, if it's not a physical storm, there's going to be a spiritual storm or a relational storm or some other type of storm that we're dealing with. That's life. And it's not that God has promised to protect us from never experiencing a storm. And no, he's promised to be faithful to be with us as we go through the storms of life. And that we must trust him and not ourselves. We must trust God and not our stuff. That if all that goes away, I'm okay. And we'll trust God because he is faithful. We're going to sing a song about the goodness of God as our response song. And there's a line at the very beginning that talks about that we are in the hand of God all the days of our lives. I trust that you believe that if you're a born again believer this morning.